Can you please describe the UN objective in Malakal?
Yeah, throughout South Sudan, UNMISS, with two S's, so United Nations Mission in South Sudan, has four major objectives with the mandate. First one is protection of civilians, second is the investigation of human rights violations, and the third and fourth third relates to the provision of humanitarian aid to people throughout the country, and the fourth relates to a ceasefire agreement, of the most recent of which was signed in August by President Salva Kiir and the leader in opposition, Riek Machar. The mandate has been extended until December of this year, and we don't know what it's going to turn into because of this brokered peace agreement that was supposed to have happened in August. So the protection of civilians is the main one, because there are over, probably conservatively, 250,000 internally displaced persons there. One state over from us, Unity State, there are 30,000 people in famine condition right now, with hundreds of thousands in sort of category 4, which is near famine or catastrophic, I'm not exactly sure. Huge food insecurity for hundreds of thousands of people throughout the country.
And so how do those objectives relate directly to your responsibilities there?
That's actually a really good question. It almost, from my own experience in Upper Nile State, almost seems, to some respects, accidental. So I'm a military liaison officer, which means my job is to coordinate and liaise with the Sudanese People's Liberation Army, who are the army of the government of South Sudan, who are currently in control in Malakal and that area. So they are the de facto government, because there are no institutions of governance, legislation, policing, infrastructure. There's nothing there except a bunch of soldiers in Malakal and throughout that area. But on the other side of the White Nile River are the Sudanese People Liberation Army in opposition. I'll just call them the opposition, just to keep it clearer. And it's always to do the pillars of protection of civilians, investigation of human rights violations, which is everything from extrajudicial killings through to abductions, through to beatings, and just about anything else. So that's predominantly what we do. The provision of humanitarian aid would only be through barges or land convoys, which is a means they use farther south to get convoys of food and humanitarian aid up from, let's say, Uganda, up through Juba and the southern part of South Sudan, the eastern, central, and western equatorial states. There's a lot to tell you, just in a few sentences. We deal with the provision of humanitarian aid just in terms of protection, or as military liaison officers with a recent barge that went up where it would stop at various checkpoints and negotiate the way through, or by truck convoy. But in terms of the last one, coordination, the peace agreements, all of that, that's a much higher level, civilian, political, Juba kind of level. Juba is the capital city of South Sudan. So things happening there. We might take action later on as that comprehensive peace agreement, the steps start being put into place with cantonment of SPLA soldiers or IO soldiers or equipment or material of war. But at this point, we're predominantly working on protection of civilians, secondary role, human rights. I'm probably the only guy in our team who really does any of that in detail. And then, yeah, the convoy piece.